and welcome to all. Really honored to be here and thanks for giving me this opportunity. What I'm going to focus on is not as much on the descriptive part of the process. It's more of a, let's say, idea in motion. It's more of a working idea which I'm going to present here and really focus on, let's say, the broad contours of what has been happening in India. So recently you see, everyone is writing both in the national newspapers and in the international newspapers that how India is no longer a democracy, how India is going the way of fascism and authoritarianism, and how the secularism is collapsing, and all those things. Especially in the international media, if you read it, you find that everything which is going on in India is all bad and all chaotic. And when we look across the country, we also find the same process, a similar kind of a process. We see that there's lots of unrest all around. There's lots of chaos which is happening, including the Delhi riot and so many other things. And there's really no certainty in the Indian political and economic process as of today. And this, what I call, is that what we're living through, our generation, we are literally seeing the fall of the First Republic in India. The First Republic was when India became independent, and the system and the kind of state formation we adopted and accompanied myths and the intellectual and academic propaganda by the state, that really constituted the First Republic. In simple terms, we can say it's a Nehruvian republic. And what we see today, that entire edifice of the Nehruvian republic or the First Republic in India is now collapsing. And in my opinion, this process will continue in the years to come. And there literally is not going to be any calm or peace in India. It's going to be far more chaotic than it is today, because as the old order collapses and the new order rises, you always have chaos in between. What I propose to do is to kind of relook at certain things. Number one is the entire myth of India being a secular state, and entire myth of India being, let's say, a Nehruvian kind of mythology that India is a secular state where Hindus and Muslims have lived together forever, happily together, and all those things. Second thing is I'm going to look at the Hindu right itself in a broader sense, because the alternative which is there to the First Republic is basically Hindutva. So I'm just going to throw some ideas to you. Let's see where it goes. I'll more than welcome the feedback on what I think about what is happening. See, when we look at the discourse today, we are told that India was founded on the basis of India's freedom struggle, that India's freedom struggle led to the foundation of this modern Indian state, which was a secular democratic republic. And the assertion by the Hindu right in the pre-independence era, let's say by the Savarkar or by the other people like Madan Mohan Malviya, or going back to the history, the Bengal movement, the entire nationalist movement in Bengal, was kind of a fringe thing, because India was always this society where people believed in communal harmony, people believed in secularism, and you have these fringe elements of Hindu right and the Pakistan movement, which basically destroyed everything. But nonetheless, we were brave enough to create a secular India. Well, I reject this view, because I think that India's national movement, the entire India's freedom struggle movement, was a completely Hindu movement. From its origin in the 19th century, you go back to the Bengal, you go back to Sannyasi movement, you go back to the Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, you go back to Maharashtra, all these social reform movements and the religious reform movements were basically Hindu movements. And all this, what you call the rediscovery of India, because when the Britishers came, they started writing the history of India in a systematic manner. So lots of history which we ourselves had forgotten, right? Like the history of the, let's say, the Mauryan period, the Gupta period, lots of them were systemized by these Europeans. They might have their own biases, the colonial prejudice, but they nonetheless started the modern systematic study of India. So this rediscovery of India's ancient past actually led to this rise of this nationalist feeling. It contributed to the rise of this confidence of India that, well, we are the ancient country, we are the ancient civilization, and we must have our own self-rule. But all those discoveries which led to this fervor of nationalism in India, they were all Hindu based. I mean, I don't see in the entire reading of the India's freedom struggle that people were going, let's say, very euphoric over the Mughal period or the Turkish period. All the elements which we were presenting as the India's essence came from the India's Hindu past. So whether it was the Congress party, whether it was even the Communist party, the Bhagat Singh and all their symbolism, their language, their cultural manifestation was the Hindu manifestation. I mean, Bhagat Singh was part of this socialist network, the underground revolutionaries. They started the initiation in the front of goddess Kali, right? They took oath in the name of Hanuman. Their entire thought process was the Hindu thought process up until at least the mid-20s up till the mid-20s. So India's freedom struggle in my movement was a completely Hindu movement. And it was not just the Hindu movement, it was the continuation of the resurgence of the Hindus, which was already underway before the Britishers came to India. So I see the arrival of the Britishers as a disruption in the process of Hindu resurgence, which was anyways going on in India from the 18th century onwards, right? From the 1700s, the Islamic imperial power was on retreat. It was on decline everywhere. Of course, there were certain strongholds like, let's say, Bengal was there, Mysore was there, Hyderabad was there. But the Islamic imperial power was on decline. There was a massive Hindu resurgence which was going on. The arrival of the Britishers actually disrupted it. And we often forget that the British conquest of India was an extremely brutal process. Somehow we remember the brutality of the Turks and the Mughals, but we somehow give a free pass to the British. But if you look at the conquest of India by the Britishers, it was done in an extremely brutal process, genocides after genocides, destruction of the large swaths of the country. So it disrupted the Hindu resurgence, but nonetheless, the Hindu resurgence remanifested itself in the form of India's modern national freedom struggle. Now, what we were basically trying to do, I mean, as a civilization, what we were basically arguing when the Britishers arrived. Now, Indians always have this sense of, say, belonging to a culture, right? This whole idea of Bharatvarsha was always there. And Hindus specifically always had a clear sense of what you say, who we are. But what Hindus always lacked was the sense of who we are not. So in the classical Samuel Huntington framework, Hindus had substance, but Hindus did not have salience. Our sense of identity was strong, that we are this, we believe in this, we follow this culture. But our sense of identity of who we are not was very weak. As if you look at the Islamic word or the Christian word, they have a very clear sense of idea who they are not. So when the Britishers arrived in India, and Britishers arrived in the backdrop where lots of transformations were happening across the world. There was rise of modern capitalism, modern industry. The British power was backed by immense industrial power and immense, let's say, intellectual movement in the European countries. And we often fail to realize today that it was quite intimidating to the people. Today we see and say, well, West to SI and India is superior. And we criticize the West. But go back to the 19th century or in the 18th century, the rise of the West was an extremely terrifying experience for the non-Western societies. Whether it's China, whether it's India, they were all put on defense. Because Britishers were coming not just on a horseback, right? Unlike the Turks, they were not coming like a horde of the people conquering your country. They were backed by modern technology and modern worldview. And we were put on a complete defensive. We did not know how to deal with that. There were attempts by various people, but we failed to a large extent in the initial years how to respond to the British. One of the greatest intellectual challenge with the British threw at the Indians is that by asking us a simple question, by the way, who you people are, right? So when people started asking that India is a country and we need our self-rule, we need self-independence, the British response was that, well, who are you people? I mean, gentlemen, who you are you a Telugu? Are you a Maratha? Are you a Jat? Are you a Gujar? Or you are a Brahmin? I mean, what is your identity? Who you bunch of people are that you are asking for your self-rule, and you are saying that we also deserve equality in the community of the nation? Uh, and that was a very formidable challenge thrown at the Indians, and there were several responses to it. And the most prominent response to it, in my opinion, most powerful, was the concept of Hindutva. Because Hindutva basically, for the first time, uh, defined in a more coherent and a proper term that Hindus are a nation. Before that, yes, there have been contestation with the imperial powers. Hindus have always fought with the Islamic imperial power, they have fought with the Europeans, but they have never ever articulated a coherent anti-imperialist ideology, which was Hindutva, which came in the 19th century, which came in the 20th century. Now, Hindutva is what? What is this process which we look at? Now, Hindutva was simply the political response of the Hindu society to Western imperialism and political Islam. Hindutva is not Hinduism, it's a political manifestation of the Hinduism, which is basically different people of different tradition under the dharmic framework coming together under a common identity to resist imperialism. Now, this entire national movement which started, look at its language, its contours, its demands, they were all essentially Hindu demands. I do not see up until, let's say, 1930s or mid 1920s at least, that there was this denial of the Hindu character of the national movement. But the problem is that India also had another problem at that time. That was the Hindus were undergoing a revival movement, but the Muslims, who were the second largest majority in the subcontinent, they were also seeing a revival of the sort. We often do not study the intellectual traditions of the Muslim society. And I'll say that the Hindus are mostly most uninformed people when it comes to the Islamic history and the Islamic intellectual traditions. Now, there was revival of Islamic imperialism as well, and that posed the this rise of pan-Islamism. Basically, we don't realize that Abdul Wahab, which is the Wahhabi stream, founder of the Wahhabism, his student Shah Waliullah was already present in India and preaching from the fort of preaching from the Akbarabadi mosque in Delhi, jihad against Marathas. He was the one who was writing letters to Abdali to invade India to destroy the Hindu resurgence. So this tradition of Islamic pan-Islamism is also very old in India. Somehow we don't talk about it. So there was revival of the pan-Islamism in India as well, and the Muslims were asserting themselves that they do not want to share power with the Hindus, and we want to maintain our feudal privileges, because remember, at least in the North India, the Muslims were disproportionately part of the feudal elites. So that posed a challenge to India's freedom struggle. And the response of the Congress party, which was by that time the most preeminent Hindu party. The Congress itself was the Hindu party. We often don't realize it now. Was to weave this myth and rhetoric of Hindu-Muslim unity and Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb. So Congress thought that we can handle the Muslim question in the subcontinent by by indulging in myth making, that Hindus and Muslims have always lived together peacefully. There's a composite culture, there's a Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb. And after India became independent, you see this myth was continued to be propagated by the state propaganda and by the academia. But the point is that Congress failed. Partition of India did happen, and this entire myth was proven to be wrong, but it continued to be in existence for decades after independence. See, the Hindus and Muslims in India have lived together, that's true. But Hindus and Muslims in India have always lived together separately. They have never lived together in the same colonies. They have never lived together as in the same village often. It was more of a forceful coexistence that they lived together, which gave rise to certain common cultural traits, which is natural. I mean, there's nothing unnatural about two communities living together and intermingling and giving rise to certain kind of a shared culture. But the problem is that the Muslims and the Hindus in Indian subcontinent historically have never ever lived together. Whatever commonalities you see in the medieval history was of two types. One was uh, the Hindus who converted to Islam, and remember, lots of upper caste converted to Islam. You go to the UP belt and Rajasthan belt, you find villages after villages of the Rajputs. You go to Kashmir, all the Brahmins, there are lots of conversion which happens to Islam. It's not just that the Dalits and the Shudras were converted. So, so if you see in the Western UP as well, I mean, the Jats were pretty much united because a Hindu Jat and a Muslim Jat, we share the same Gotra. So they will not marry with each other, but apart from that, they were all united as a social unit. That was because that the Muslims had carried, even after conversion, their pre-Islamic identities and connections and traditions and cultures, which what we today celebrate as, there was lots of commonalities within the Hindus and the Muslims. But in the last 100 years, with the rise of Tablighi Jamaat and Wahhabi school of thought and Deobandi school of thought, those traditions and those cultures from the Muslim community has been slowly removed. So you don't find those identities now survive among the Muslim communities. Second part is Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb was simply the urban feudal culture. I mean, the feudal elites of Hindus and Muslims, the Jamindars and all sitting together, enjoying some Muzra and song, does not create a unified culture. It's simply an urban elite culture. I mean, in every society, in every time you have an elite culture, you have a mass culture. In the mass culture, there was no composite culture because the mass culture was entirely Hindu culture. If you go to Delhi and Lucknow in the 18th century, 19th century, you will find this composite culture which we celebrate today, but it was very flimsy. It was only at the surface. And it didn't took very much for it to completely unravel, which we see in the form of the partition. Now, what happens is that after the partition happened and India becomes independence, somehow I will say it's a tragedy of the history that the Nehruvian elites continued to, or they were able to capture power and, let's say, shape the policy and the India's trajectory for the decades to come. But it was a setback to the Hindu nationalism, but I'll say all was not lost. Because Indian state, which was created in 1947, in my opinion, was never the secular state. India has never been a secular state. The Indian state which came into existence in 1947, which I will say was essentially a Hindu reformist state. Even though it imagined itself as a secular state, even though our rulers and ruling class denied that it's a Hindu state, that it's a secular state, the character of the Indian state which came into existence, I'm repeating it again, it was a Hindu reformist state. See, what did it do? I mean, this is the first state in the India's history which abolished caste system. There is no state in India's history which took a stand against the untouchability. I don't find any state. There's no state in the Indian history which did as much of social reforms in the Hindus as, as the Indian state did. So what it did, it abolished the caste system, it integrated the society to a large extent, it Sanskritized the Dalits and the tribals to the large extent, it systemized the social laws, it revived the classical Hindu art form and the folk culture, the patronage which was completely withdrawn from the Indian languages because Farsi was the language of the large parts of the country, even in the south, under Hyderabad and Tipu Sultan and all those people. They actually sought to replace the Telugu and the Kannada with the Farsi language. Now the revival, the coming of the Indian state, the modern Indian state. Now we talked about secularism, we say Urdu, Farsi bhi bhasha hai. But what has actually happened in the last 70 years that Urdu, Farsi have been completely replaced from the mainstream and been replaced by the Hindi and the other languages like Kannada, Tamil, and the Telugu, which got the state patronage. The Hindu state, this state controls the Hindu temples. It has also introduced an element of uniformity as well. Now, lots of people disagree with that, but as I said, it's a Hindu state, it's a Hindu reformist state. It has its own vision. And this is the state which continues to intervene in the Hindu society in the last 70 years with the popular legitimacy. Now, nowadays, when there's a lots of clamor in the Hindu right, when they say state should not intervene into the Hindu social laws or the religious institutions, but that's, in my opinion, is not the majority view. When Indian state decides to take over temples, the majority of the Hindus welcome it. That's also the reality. I mean, when Samajwadi Party was in power in UP, they decided to overtake 2 temples in Mathura, and everyone supported it because the temples were so badly run before the takeover of the government. So even though there are difference of opinion among a section of Hindu right, but the point is that the Indian state enjoys popular legitimacy to intervene into the Hindu social and religious laws alone. It cannot intervene into the Muslim laws. It cannot intervene into the Christian laws because this is not a secular state, because it has always been a Hindu state in denial. So what I'm saying is that the Hindu nationalism and the Hindu character of the Indian state was always clear. It was never the fringe element. It was the Nehruvian secularism which was the fringe in India, but unfortunately a fringe which controlled the state power. And now what you're seeing today is simply the breakdown of that order. And that has been led by, I say, lots of factors. One of the major factors has been the economic reforms and the urbanization of India. So the moment you have the industrial growth in the country, the moment you have the urban growth in the country, what you see is that the social identities, the parochial social identities of reason, of caste, this starts breaking down. Because once you have urbanization and industrialization, you see the people are uprooted from their villages. They are forced into a major city, mega city. The people of different caste who were living separately in their villages, now they have to live together in the working area, in the same apartment, in the same working class colonies, and the work in the same factory. That leads to what I say, a breakdown of the older identities and the rise of a common identity. And what is the common identity of the majority of the people? That is Hinduism. So while the people in the villages have very strong identity that I belong to this caste, that I am a Yadav, or I am a Thakur, I am a Rajput, you see in the urban centers, the Hindu identity starts to dominate. And this is a long process, it's a long, we don't have time to discuss that much. But what is happening is that the rise of the middle class in India and the rise of the urban centers in India has actually led the process of the collapse of the Nehruvian elite and the assertion of the Hindu character of India, which I think it was always there. And now what we're seeing today is that the elites who are ruling in India, the Nehruvian elites, they are slowly losing the debate and slowly losing the power. What is BJP? I mean, the BJP and RSS, I would say in the historical view, they are simply the modern vehicle of the historical process of the rise of the Hindu Rashtra in India. The process was underway even in the 18th century. RSS was formed in 1925. BJP was formed in the 1980s. They are the modern political vehicles, cultural vehicles of the historical process, which is the rise of Hindu India. And what we're seeing today, India is becoming what it was always supposed to become, right? To become a Hindu state, in my opinion, was always the destiny of India. The destiny was denied in 1947, but denial of the destiny does not mean that the destiny has been buried. So what you see today, what is BJP doing in power? The rise of BJP is simply reorienting the Indian polity towards its more natural trajectory of being a Hindu country. So in the north, what you see that the Kashmir is fully integrated now. In the south, the Dravidian movement is melting away. I mean, you can see the change in even in Tamil Nadu. In the east, even Bengal is now turning saffron. In the Western India, the secular parties are now forced to ally with the Hindutva parties to survive. The political debate has completely shifted away from the secular and pseudo-secular paradigm to Hindu and pseudo-Hindu paradigm. The Ram Mandir is done. The CA is the law. NPR will happen and NRC will come sooner or later. So this is the process which we are seeing today, and that is obviously leading to severe backlash from the old order. And this, the struggle which came in open over the CA and the NRC, simply shows that the churning which is going on in India is very deep, and this process in the future is going to continue, and we have to wait and see what is going to happen. And this is what I think is happening in India, a kind of a very broad overview, not going into much of the detail because we have limited time, but I will be more than happy to listen to your views and your ideas. Thank you.
Abhinavji, thanks a lot for your talk, and I had explicitly said time is not a constraint, so that's okay. Anyway, I think it was a very good, thought-provoking talk that you gave. Different perspective, that it is a reformist Hindu movement, a different perspective.
Reformist Hindu state.
Hindu state, right. So now the problem is, how do we, how do you see this backlash happening from especially Islamic, section, it started much before Delhi. For sure, CA was just a symptom. Because CA, they don't have any logic why they are agitating. But then it was just, I suppose, the last straw or the spark which ignited the whole thing. Ram Janmabhoomi and so many things, Triple Talaq, it was building up. And then now you see all the forces coming together in terms of, somebody from UAE tweets, Arundhati Roy tweets, and Imran Khan says something. Whole Islamophobia thing is going to be thrown at. And nowhere in this paradigm you see the old order, be it Congress, all these guys, Samajwadi Party, Dalit parties. They are not the players, at least in the front. There are newer guys who have taken over. So how do you see this panning out, and how long do you think this kind of thing is going to happen? And where do you see this ending up at? Ideally, what they are looking at is the people who are unleashing this, they want another partition of India. In fact, in Tamil Nadu, they have started, you have given one country to Muslims and one for Hindus, we need for Christians. So there's a Christian movement which is happening. And of course, we already know Nagaland for Christ movement is anyway there. So how do you see these things happening where the old political order is losing its relevance, but newer players, faceless at least, and leaderless, but then emerging into very strong forces attacking the core of Hindutva or Hindu forces? How do you look at it?
See, that is bound to happen. I mean, remember, the character of the Islamic power in India is that it has always relied on outside support to rule India. So look at the history of the last 6-7 centuries. Whenever the ruling dynasties of power, Islamic dynasties and powers of India weakened, there was a fresh invasion of India and it was restored, right? So there's nothing new in that they're asking, tweeting to these Arab sheikhs and all those people that save us, we are under stress. On the ground, nothing is happening against the Muslims. I don't see anything happening against the Muslims, apart from what you said, the normal communal problem, which always existed in the country. But the problem is that they have realized that they have lost the hope of regaining political power in the near future. See, what I wrote in one of the articles, that the situation today is just like the redux of the Marathas in Delhi, right? So the Marathas, after centuries, you have a Hindu power ruling from Delhi. And I have no hesitation in saying that this is a Hindu government, after all. Its character is, at least, is not an anti-Hindu government. So now you have a Hindu power in Delhi after centuries, basically. And then you have all the enemies mobilizing, both within and outside India. And nothing else explains, in my opinion, this extreme hostility, even from the West. Because remember, the Hindus are the one who are delusional. They are in denial. But the other side is not in denial. They see what is happening. The Muslims are very clear as to what is happening. The Western world sees the rise of Hindu nationalism as a threat in the future. But we who have to become more serious about playing the big power game. Unfortunately, Hindus remain one of the most uninformed people in the world. They have no interest in learning what is happening outside their border. I mean, what explains the complete absence of Hindu records or Hindu observation of the foreign countries in the history? The Hindu traders were going to China, they were going to Rome, they were going to Greece, they were going to Arabia, they were going all over the world. But you do not see any steady, any systematic records, any historical document of what they saw in those countries in medieval time or in the ancient time. Whereas when it comes to India, you follow all the Muslim records of India. The Westerners coming to India have left a very rich records. So that is a Hindu problem. I mean, we are blind in a sense that we refuse to see beyond our, I say beyond our nose. And it's a frog in the well mentality, which I think has been cultivated over millennia by the caste system. So because Hindu worldview rarely extends beyond the interest of their caste, and it is applicable to every caste, right? So because your social structure is such that you are always self-obsessed and obsessed with your own community, that you fail to see what is happening beyond the borders. When it comes to, I mean, I'm not very familiar with what is happening with the Christians in the South, but I will not be surprised as to what their missionaries are doing. But I do not see that the Islamic power in India is going to revive. They are going to remain a powerful force because remember, we have Pakistan and Bangladesh as well. So demographically, the Muslims are going to remain the powerful force. They cannot uproot the Hindu power, at least in the coming centuries, but they have and they can impose the civil war on India, right? It is a possibility. It's up to the Indian state and the Hindu community to deal with it. And certainly it cannot be dealt in the crass manner in which we are seeing nowadays. All these media coverage of Corona jihad and all is too third class and too childish. This is not how you deal with serious problems. Not by provoking your opponents even more and making fun of yourself in the entire international community. Coming to other kind of a thing, see, India even today is a Hindu polity, whether it's the Dalit politics, whether it's the communist politics in India, whether it's the Samajwadi politics, whether even it's the Dravidian politics. They are part of the Hindu polity. Even if they are opposing the Hindu and Hinduism, they are part of this Hindu polity because they have no existence out of it. There is no left-wing communist party in the Pakistan. There is no Dalit politics in the Pakistan. There is no social justice politics in the Pakistan. These are the characteristics of the Hindu polity. And I don't think that we need to be too much afraid of these polity. I mean, the point is that we have to take it for granted that a big country like India will have different political expressions. So if you're too, let's say, obsessed or too fearful of these kind of assertions, we are literally fighting the battles which are not really very important. Second part is that, yes, the partition of India in the coming centuries, if not in the coming decades, is a possibility. Because remember, India is a Hindu reformist state, but India is not a nation state, in my opinion. India is a civilizational state. The boundaries of India are coterminous with the extent of the Indian civilization. So historically, as the Indian civilization has shrunk, the boundaries of India have always shrunk. The partition of India in 1947 was not simply the process of nationhood and nation state, all those modern processes. It is simply that a large number of the population of the Indian subcontinent shifted its allegiance to a different civilization narrative. So they no longer saw themselves as the part of the Indian story, right? So the Pakistanis are very clear about this thing, that they do not see the Islam and Muslims as the part of the Indian civilization. So it was a civilizational rupture what we see happened in 1947. And as if the demographic change continues and the civilizational boundaries of India continue to shrink, the partition of India is certainly a reality in the next 100, 200 years.
Yeah, I mean, while you said that be it the Dravidian parties or any of these are part of the Hindu polity. The problem is they are the ones who are actually nurturing these anti-Hindu forces. You know, right from Kanyakumari, you know what happened in Kodankulam, Kanyakumari, Tuticorin, the 40% of Indian copper uh, production got stopped because church decided it so. It is completely a Christian movement.
Yeah.
It is a violence unleashed by the church. So right from Kanyakumari, in fact, if you go to Kanyakumari, save the Kanyakumari temple, entire things around is completely Christian. So in fact, you see a lot of Jesus statues welcoming you to India. You don't find any Hindu deity welcoming anybody to India.
Yeah.
So from that point onwards, you go up to Odisha coast or up to Bengal. The entire coast is now heavily Christianized. So much so that they could hoist a very powerful, with a huge mandate, powerful chief minister in Andhra Pradesh. Right? So it is something which is a gift of these parties who, according to you, you're saying the part of the Hindu polity.
Yeah, because
that
they
is a worry.
So I'm not saying that they're Hindu parties. I'm saying they're part of the Hindu polity because India is the Hindu polity. They are the elements who operate within the Hindu polity, right? They cannot operate outside it. That is my point. That is a just like communism is the part of the Western polity, right? Even though the communists were the one who waged the most systematic cultural war against the West, but they had no existence out of it. Similarly, Dravidian parties are, if you see it as a problem, even then they are the part of the Hindu polity. This is what I'm saying.
Yeah. So anyway, Hindus are problems for Hindus themselves is a issue we all are aware of it. That's where it stands. How do you see this panning out? How long do you think this thing is going to go on, where the old order will take time to die its natural deaths? And then how do you see this emerging? Do you see that it's going to be a rupture between civilizational thoughts, and then we're going to have a lot of disturbed lifestyle? Or would you see one of them asserting and then you see some kind of equilibrium happening? How do you see this panning
out? See, there is no certainty as to what will happen, right? Because when the changes happen, history is not linear. So India was supposed to become a Hindu country in 1947, it didn't become. But there's no guarantee that we will move toward that direction inevitably, right? So the problem is that the other side, which wants to replace the old order, itself is very confused, which is Hindutva. So, I mean, the problem on Hindutva side, or let's say the Hindu side, not just Hindutva, but the Hindu side as well, that we have not even begun to engage with the modernity. So I don't find any literature, any serious thinking. Let's look at the Islamic world, right? The Islamic world from the 70s onwards contested modernity. They rejected it. And they said, we are going to turn our back against the modernity. And we will create our own, version of the modern Islamic identity. And they succeeded. The Chinese have done that to a great extent. They say no Western modernity, Han modernity. The Hindus have not even, begun to engage with this idea. So all discussion you see in Hindu side is basically, this is our Indic thought, this is our Indic culture, this is our Indic education system. No blue draft. There's no blueprint, no draft as to what they want to do. We're not engaging with the frontier areas of the knowledge production in the social sciences. Only what we end up doing is harping about some 19th and 20th century debates, the Gandhi ka Gram Swaraj and all those things, or all those things we are talking about. So we are not being able to put a proper intellectual framework for the future. So the future in that sense is uncertain. We have the collapsing order, but the most powerful force which can replace it, Hindutva itself, is not prepared, in my opinion. This is again just like the Marathas in Delhi. The history was moving towards a particular direction. Marathas were the most powerful people, but they could never replace the Mughal Empire, right? This is what is happening. This is I use the word, that's the redux of Marathas in Delhi, very carefully. What we need to do is that we need to understand that India is very rapidly becoming an urban society. India is very rapidly going to become an industrial society. And this old discourse of 20th century is not going to sustain ourselves. harping about tradition and culture and Sanskriti is not going to sustain you for long. Why? Because when societies change, when they industrialize, when they become urban, lots of the Sanskriti which we talk about, which is basically derived from the agrarian cultural milieu, will disappear. Because industrialization is not simply about having a factory or having new technology. Industrialization is a complete social transformation, right? It has never happened in any part of the world that the societies have become industrialized and they have retained their medieval or the ancient culture and tradition, right? The identity might survive, but that tradition and culture, the Sanskriti changes itself. So we need to be more serious about playing this game, because I always say that Hindus are the most unserious player in the international stage. What does the future hold? I don't know. This chaos will continue unless until new tradition or new something the system rises up.
Okay.